They expected the diplomat to walk away victorious. When Ambassador Corvus insulted Duke Ashford Thorn in 3 languages, Voltran, Meridian, and High Rovian, no one in the glittering banquet hall understood him. No one except the girl refilling wine glasses along the eastern wall, her presence so unremarkable that even the servants forgot her name. But when she stepped forward and answered him in all 3 tongues, her voice steady as winter steel, the entire room understood one thing perfectly. The balance of power had just shifted in a way no treaty could reverse. 6 hours earlier, Alara Finn had been invisible. She moved through the preparation halls of Ashford Manor with practiced efficiency, her movements calibrated to avoid attention the way shadows avoid lamplight. The other maids whispered about tonight's banquet, the foreign delegation, the trade negotiations, the risk of war if talks failed, but Alara kept silent. She had learned in her 3 months at the estate that silence was armor. The less she spoke, the less she could be blamed. "You girl." The head steward's voice cut across the servants' corridor. "Evening service. East Gallery. Don't spill, don't stare, don't speak unless directly addressed." Alara nodded once. The instructions were always the same. The banquet hall transformed as dusk fell. Crystal chandeliers caught firelight and multiplied it into constellations across vaulted ceilings. Gold leaf gleamed on every column. The long table stretched beneath white linens so pristine they seemed to glow. Nobility arrived in waves of silk and superiority, their laughter carefully measured, their compliments edged with calculation. Duke Ashford Thorn stood at the hall's center, still as carved stone. He was young for a duke, barely 30, but grief had aged him in ways time alone could not. Since his father's death 2 years prior, he had ruled the northern territories with quiet, unshakable authority. He rarely smiled. He never raised his voice. And he possessed the particular stillness that made others nervous enough to fill silence with their own mistakes. The Voltran delegation arrived last, and with them came Ambassador Corvus. He entered like a storm given human form, broad-shouldered, loud-laughed, draped in furs and confidence. Where the Duke embodied restraint, Corvus embodied excess. Where Ashford spoke in careful sentences, Corvus treated conversation like performance. The contrast was immediate and, Alara suspected, entirely deliberate. "Duke Thorn." Corvus clasped Ashford's hand with theatrical warmth. "Your hospitality precedes you. Though I confess, I expected warmer welcomes in the frozen north." The insult landed softly enough that half the guests missed it. Ashford's expression didn't flicker. "Then you've been misinformed about both," he replied evenly. Alara positioned herself along the eastern wall with the other serving staff, a silver pitcher cool against her palms. From here, she could observe without being observed, a skill she'd cultivated long before arriving at Ashford Manor. The banquet unfolded in practice courses, pheasant and politics, wine and veiled warnings. And beneath it all, Corvus circled like a wolf testing fences. The shift came during the 4th course. Corvus leaned back in his chair, swirling wine and crystal, and spoke in Voltran, his native tongue. His tone remained jovial, but the words cut clean. A commentary on northern weakness, on inherited titles mattering more than earned respect, on dukes who ruled through silence because they had nothing meaningful to say. Several Voltran diplomats stiffened. One coughed into his napkin, but the rest of the table continued eating, oblivious, as Corvus smiled and delivered insult after insult in a language he assumed only his own delegation understood. Alara's grip tightened on the pitcher. She had learned Voltran from her grandmother, who had crossed the border as a girl. She understood every poisonous word, and she watched Duke Ashford's face, impassive, unreacting, and realized with creeping horror that he either didn't understand or had chosen not to respond. Corvus switched languages mid-sentence, sliding into Meridian with practiced ease. The insults sharpened, observations on the Duke's dead father, on how quickly northern power had softened, on bloodlines thinning like watered wine. Now a Meridian trade minister looked uncomfortable, but still silence. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew a dozen ways to stay invisible, to keep her position, to survive unnoticed. Speaking now would shatter all of them. Then Corvus leaned forward and switched again, into High Rovian, the language of scholars and contracts. This time, He questioned the Duke's intelligence directly, suggested that a man who inherited everything understood nothing, implied that Ashford's silence stemmed from emptiness rather than strategy. The Rovian ambassador actually flinched, and Alara realized with sudden, terrible clarity. Corvus was building towards something, testing boundaries, seeing how far disrespect could travel before anyone stopped him. This wasn't negotiation. It was dominance. The Duke remained perfectly still, and Alara made a choice that would change everything. She stepped forward from the wall, not dramatically, just a shift in position, a realignment. But in a room calibrated for hierarchy, even small movements from the wrong people drew attention. Ambassador Corvus, she said clearly, in flawless Voltran. Perhaps you should repeat that in the common tongue, so everyone can appreciate your observations. The effect was instantaneous. Conversations died. Glasses froze. Every head turned, not toward Corvus, not even toward the Duke, but toward her. A maid, speaking a foreign language, challenging a diplomat. Corvus's smile faltered for exactly one heartbeat before reforming into something sharper. And Duke Ashford Thorn finally moved, lifting his gaze to her face with an attention that felt like standing in winter sun, cold, bright, inescapable. The silence stretched like drawn wire, seconds away from snapping. Alara kept her hands steady at her sides despite the weight of 50 aristocratic stares pressing down on her shoulders. She had just committed an unforgivable breach, a servant interrupting nobility, speaking out of turn, challenging a foreign ambassador. Any one of those transgressions could cost her position. All three together could cost far more. Ambassador Corvus recovered first, leaning back with calculated amusement. How unexpected. He switched to Meridian smoothly, addressing her now instead of about her. Tell me, does your master know you've been listening where you don't belong? The Meridian trade minister's eyes widened. Now others understood. This wasn't merely about language. It was about theft of knowledge, about a servant collecting secrets meant for noble ears alone. Understanding isn't theft, Alara replied in the same tone, her accent matching his precisely, though using it to hide disrespect might be. A ripple moved through the Meridian delegation. Corvus's smile thinned. Careful, girl. He dropped his voice, still in Meridian. You're playing a dangerous game for someone so easily replaced. Then perhaps you should play a more honest one, Alara said, and switched, not to common tone, but to High Rovian. Her pronunciation rang clear across the hall. Since you speak 3 languages so fluently, Ambassador, surely you can manage honesty in at least one. The Rovian ambassador choked on his wine, and just like that, the concealment shattered. The guests who hadn't understood before certainly understood now. Whatever Corvus had been saying, it was serious enough to be challenged in 3 different languages by a maid willing to risk everything. Enough. Duke Ashford's voice cut through the charged air, not loud, but absolute. He stood slowly, his movement drawing every eye away from Alara and onto himself. Ambassador Corvus, you've been testing boundaries all evening. Shall we discuss them plainly now, or continue pretending? Corvus straightened, reassessing. I meant no offense, Your Grace. Merely cultural observations. In 3 languages you assumed I wouldn't understand. Ashford's tone remained neutral, but something cold flickered beneath it. Tell me, Ambassador, is this how Valterra conducts diplomacy? Through insult disguised as ignorance? Corvus began. Because if it is, Ashford continued, we can end these negotiations now. I have no interest in treaties built on disrespect. The temperature in the room plummeted. Trade negotiations ending meant tariffs reimposed, borders closing, potential conflict. The Voltran delegation exchanged alarmed glances. Corvus had overplayed his hand, and now the Duke had called him on it publicly, leaving no room for graceful retreat. Perhaps, Corvus said carefully, I was overzealous in my assessments. Perhaps you were. Ashford's gaze flicked briefly to Alara, just a moment, but waited with something unreadable before returning to Corvus. My household is built on clarity, Ambassador. If you have concerns about northern governance, voice them openly, so we may address them properly. It was a masterful reframing, transforming Corvus's hidden insults into legitimate diplomatic concerns while simultaneously making it impossible for him to repeat them without looking like a coward. The ambassador clearly recognized the trap, his jaw tightening. "My apologies, Your Grace," he said finally. "No concerns. Only admiration for your household's unexpected resources." His eyes cut toward Alara when he said resources, the threat unmistakable. Ashford followed his gaze. For a long moment, the Duke simply looked at her, this unremarkable maid who had just altered the entire evening's trajectory. Then he gestured almost imperceptibly toward the head steward. "See that, Miss Finn?" Alara supplied quietly. "Alara Finn. See that Miss Finn is reassigned." Ashford's voice carried across the hall. "She'll no longer be serving banquet duties." Alara's stomach dropped. Reassigned. The polite word for dismissed. She had known the risk, but facing it still felt like falling. "She'll be working directly with my senior staff instead," Ashford continued. "Someone with her linguistic capabilities is wasted on wine service." The room collectively inhaled. That wasn't dismissal. That was promotion, immediate, public, impossible to ignore. Corvus's expression flickered between surprise and irritation before settling into forced politeness. "How progressive," he managed. "How practical," Ashford corrected. "Talent should be recognized, regardless of station." The statement hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown. Because in aristocratic society, station was everything, and the Duke had just publicly declared it meant nothing compared to merit. The banquet resumed, but the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. Conversations grew more careful. Corvus drank more and spoke less. And Alara remained stationed along the wall, no longer invisible, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes tracking her movements. After the guests departed and servants cleared the hall, the head steward appeared at Alara's side, his expression unreadable. "His Grace wants to see you. Study. Now." The walk through Ashford Manor's corridors felt endless. Alara had never been to the Duke's private study. Servants rarely ventured beyond the working halls. With each step, doubt crept deeper. What if the promotion had been theater? What if she was about to be dismissed privately after being elevated publicly? The study door loomed ahead, heavy oak carved with northern roses. She knocked once. "Enter," came the Duke's voice. The room beyond was smaller than expected, lined with books and maps, a fire burning low in the grate. Duke Ashford stood by the window, still in his formal attire, but somehow less imposing here, more human, more tired. "You speak Voltran, Meridian, and High Rovian," he said without preamble. "Where did you learn?" "My grandmother was Voltran," Alara answered. "The others, books mostly. And listening." Listening. Something almost like amusement touched his voice. "How long have you worked here?" 3 months, Your Grace." 3 months, and I never knew. He turned from the window, studying her properly now. "Why didn't you mention your languages during hiring?" "I wasn't asked," she said simply. And servants who stand out rarely last long. The honesty seemed to catch him off guard. "Yet tonight you stood out deliberately." "What?" Alara met his gaze, just briefly. "Because someone needed to. It could have cost you everything." "Yes. But you did it anyway." She nodded once. Ashford was quiet for a long moment, something working behind his careful expression. "You placed yourself at risk for me," he said finally. "For someone who's never spoken to you beyond orders." "What?" "Because it was wrong," Alara said. "What he was doing. The way he spoke about you. About everything you're trying to build here. And because..." She hesitated. "Because silence in the face of cruelty is just another kind of cruelty." The words settled between them like snow. The fire crackled softly in the silence that followed. Duke Ashford studied Alara with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she held steady, knowing somehow that this moment mattered more than protocol. "You're right," he said finally. "It was wrong, and I should have responded myself instead of..." He paused, choosing words carefully. "Instead of proving Corvus right through my silence." The admission startled her. Noblemen didn't acknowledge fault, especially not to servants. "Starting tomorrow," Ashford continued, "you'll work with my diplomatic staff. We have documents in 6 languages that need proper translation, treaties, correspondence, trade agreements. I need someone I can trust to tell me what they actually say, not what people want them to say. Your Grace, I'm not trained in..." "You learned 3 languages from books and listening," he interrupted. "That demonstrates more capability than most trained diplomats show in a lifetime. Will you accept?" It wasn't really a question, but he asked it like one, as if her answer mattered. as if she had choice. Yes, Alara said. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Corvus will retaliate, not directly, but diplomatically. He'll question your translations, your credentials, anything to undermine tonight. It won't be pleasant. I survived tonight, the Lara replied. I can survive whatever comes next. Something shifted in Ashford's expression, not quite a smile, but close. I believe you can. Dismissed. Alara turned to leave, then paused at the door. Your Grace? He was wrong. About everything he said. Which part? All of it. But especially the part about inherited titles meaning you understand nothing. She looked back at him. You understood exactly what he was doing. You just chose patience over pride. That's not weakness. That's control. She left before he could respond, but she felt his gaze follow her into the corridor. The retaliation began within days. Corvus remained at Ashford Manor for 2 more weeks while negotiations dragged forward, and he used every moment to test Alara's new position. He submitted documents claiming they supported Voltran interests. Her translations revealed clauses that did the opposite. He spoke in mixed dialects during meetings, trying to catch errors. She navigated them flawlessly. He questioned her credentials publicly. The Duke defended them absolutely. And slowly, something unexpected happened. The other servants began treating Alara differently. Not with resentment, but with cautious respect. She still ate meals with them, still helped with heavy work despite her new duties. She hadn't become distant or superior. She'd just proven that competence could be recognized, even from impossible places. The breakthrough came during the final negotiation session. Corvus presented a treaty amendment in High Rovian, smiling confidently as the translator, his own man, rendered it into common tone. The translation sounded reasonable: adjusted tariffs, simplified customs procedures, mutual benefit. Alara sat at the far end of the table now, no longer along the wall. She listened carefully, then looked up at Duke Ashford. Their eyes met for just a moment, and she saw the question there. The translation is incomplete, she said clearly. Article 7 includes a subordination clause in the original text. Any trade disputes would be resolved under Voltran law, not neutral arbitration. The Voltran translator went pale. Corvus's smile evaporated. That's not. The translator began. It is, Alara said calmly, and recited the Rovian phrase perfectly, then translated it word by word. The clause is hidden in conditional grammar, but it's there. Ashford's expression hardened. Ambassador, is this accurate? Corvus recovered smoothly. A minor technical detail? No. Ashford's voice cut like winter wind. A deliberate deception. We're done here. Your Grace, surely. I said we're done. The Duke stood, and the entire room stood with him. You came to my home, insulted my household, and attempted to embed fraud into a treaty. Negotiations are terminated. You have until morning to leave Ashford lands. This will have consequences, Corvus warned. Then we'll face them honestly, Ashford replied. Unlike some, the Voltran delegation departed that night, furious and empty-handed. The other diplomatic parties watched with new wariness, recognizing that the Northern Duke, who rarely spoke, had just demonstrated exactly how powerful quiet conviction could be when finally unleashed. In the weeks that followed, 3 other territories reached out for trade discussions, impressed by Ashford's integrity. The treasury stabilized. Border tensions eased. And throughout it all, Alara worked alongside the Duke's senior staff, translating documents and occasionally sitting in on meetings where her insight proved invaluable. But the real change was smaller, more personal. Duke Ashford began asking her opinion, not just on translations, but on strategy. He remembered how she took her tea. Once, passing in a corridor, he simply said, "Thank you for that night," and kept walking, leaving her standing there with something warm and unexpected blooming in her chest. 6 months after the banquet, Ashford held a smaller dinner. Regional governors, no foreign powers. Alara attended as part of the official staff now, seated at the table instead of serving beside it. During the meal, one governor remarked on the Duke's improved diplomatic standing. Whatever you changed, Thorn, it's working. Ashford glanced down the table toward Alara, just briefly. I started listening to the right people, he said, and stopped mistaking silence for wisdom. After the guests departed, Alara found him in the study again, reviewing correspondence by lamplight. She knocked softly. Come in. He looked up, unsurprised. Can't sleep either? Too much thinking, she admitted. About. About how different everything is now. About how easily it could have gone another way. Ashford set down his pen. It could have. If you'd stayed silent, if I'd dismissed what you said, if either of us had chosen safety over truth. He paused. I'm glad we didn't. So am I, Alara said quietly. They stood there in comfortable silence. No longer Duke and Maid. Not quite equals by society's measure, but something new. Two people who had seen each other clearly when it mattered most and chosen to trust what they saw. Outside, snow began to fall across Ashford Manor's grounds, covering the formal gardens in quiet white. Inside, lamplight warmed the study's corners. And for the first time since inheriting a title he'd never asked for, Duke Ashford Thorne looked at someone standing in his home and felt not the weight of responsibility, but simple, uncomplicated gratitude. Stay, he said. Not just tonight. Here, in this work. I need. He hesitated, then chose honesty. I need someone who tells me truth, even when it's dangerous. Especially then. Alara smiled. I'm not going anywhere, Your Grace. Ashford, he corrected gently. Here, away from court, just Ashford. Then I'm not going anywhere, Ashford. The snow fell faster outside, but neither of them noticed. They had work ahead, treaties to review, territories to rebuild, a world that still judged worth by bloodlines instead of character. But for now, in the quiet study of a northern manor, two people who should never have seen each other had built something rare. A partnership forged not in hierarchy, but in mutual recognition that competence, courage, and honesty mattered more than any title ever could. And that, they both understood, was worth defending.